Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going back to woodworking and building this simple shelf system. So stick around and I'll show you how I made it. Here in the corner of my basement, I've centralized all my networking hardware. This is where the internet comes into my house, and then Ethernet cables run my local network out to different rooms. Unfortunately, it's not very well organized or even space efficient. This shelf is too small. It's not deep enough to hold all my devices. So my UPS is down here all by itself. And beneath the shelf, there's a lot of empty space that's just being wasted. So I'm going to build a simple shelf system that'll fix these problems. All my networking devices will fit on one shelf, and beneath that, I'll have other shelves that can add more storage, because I could always use more storage. So let's get started. Most of the cabinet is built using plywood I already had on hand. The sides of the cabinet will be the biggest pieces, and I'm using leftover 5/8" plywood from when I built my workbench. These are the leftovers from the lower shelves of the workbench. The pieces are already 21 inches wide, which will be the depth of the shelves. I would have preferred to have it 24 inches deep, but I really wanted to use these pieces up, so I guess I'm stuck with 21 inches deep. I cut both pieces together to a height of 77 inches, which is the total height of the cabinet. The cabinet will have 3 shelves made out of 1/2" plywood. All 3 shelves need to be 21 inches deep to match the sides, and 24 inches wide, which is what I decided for the internal width of the cabinet. For the last pieces, I cut some 1/4" plywood to use as the back of the cabinet. The back is about 25 inches wide, but I only had 2-foot wide sheets, so I cut out 3 pieces to stack on top of each other in the back. With all the pieces of the shelves cut to size, I took them down to my basement to put them together. I planned on making each shelf exactly 18 inches apart, so I cut 2 thin scrap pieces of plywood to 18 inches to use as spacers during assembly. After making sure they're exactly the same length, I started putting together the cabinet. The shelves will be supported by these strips of hardwood that I bought at the lumber yard in a bundle. I pre-drilled 4 holes into each strip of wood. Next, I used the 18-inch spacers to mark where the shelf will sit. Then, I drilled through the existing holes in the shelf supports to make pilot holes into the plywood underneath for wood screws. I drilled in the wood screws and left the tip sticking slightly out so I can easily match it up to the pilot holes in the plywood. After I added some wood glue, I put the shelf support into place and tightened down the screws. I added some weight and let the glue dry. For the next shelf, I wanted it 18 inches above the top of the first shelf, which meant I had to include the lower shelf along with the 18-inch spacers when measuring. Once I marked the location of the shelf, installing the shelf support was exactly the same as the first one. I repeated this for all of the shelf supports, 1 support for each side for each of the 3 shelves, for a total of 6 supports. To put it all together, I started by laying it out on the floor with the back facing up. I will actually install the shelves in the last step, but for now, I need them in place while I attach the back panels. I used a couple of clamps to hold the sides together while I laid out the back panels and used the panels to make sure that all the pieces are square. Once I was happy with the exact layout, I moved both the clamps to be in line with the shelf for a firmer hold. Then I started attaching the back panels to the sides. To attach them, I just laid down some glue, spread it around, and then laid the panel on top. I added some weight to give it a better bond while drying. And to add some extra strength, I hammered in some finishing nails to fully secure the back panel to the sides. Then I repeated the exact same thing for the other 2 panels, making sure they sat flush against the panel below it. Once the glue all dried, I stood the cabinet upright and started attaching the shelves. Adding in the shelves was pretty easy. I put some glue on the shelf supports and on the sides of the cabinet just above the supports. I also added some glue to the back edge of the shelf. Then I slid the shelf in place, which took a little extra help from my hammer. I clamped the front of the cabinet together for a nice tight fit. I nailed the shelf in place using finishing nails and then added some weight to press everything together while the glue dried. I decided to add one last piece of plywood to the top of the cabinet, which I'll use to screw to the wall for added stability. I don't want it to tip over accidentally. So I used some scrap half-inch plywood that was already cut to 24 inches and glued it to the back of the cabinet at the top of the back panel. Before I was able to put the cabinet into place, I had to clean out that area. So I removed all my network hardware, which meant no internet until I finished putting everything back into place. So at this point, I was pretty motivated to finish this project. Next, I removed the existing shelf, which is only held into place by a few screws. Finally, I pushed the cabinet into the corner and maneuvered it into place. It's a perfect fit. For safety, I screwed the top into the wall. That wall is just plywood, so all I had to do was drill pilot holes and then secure it with wood screws. Later, I realized I should have used a washer, so I eventually added one to each screw. And now that the shelves are in place, it's time to put back all my network devices and get my internet back up and running. All done. My internet is back up, all my devices are on one shelf, and I have a bunch of new storage space. Putting it together was quick and easy, so if you need a set of shelves, I hope this helped you out with building your own. If you liked my video, please consider subscribing to my channel. And while you're here, take a look at the other videos I've made. Thanks for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next time.